Well, hello and welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Your Blank What Now podcast. My name's Marcy Nettles, and I am your host. And I have got the great pleasure of bringing you amazing guests every single week that have gone through some crap in their lives. They've maybe made some bad decisions, or maybe life just happened, and they found themselves in places that they did not think they would ever be. And
Mm,
yet, they had this defining moment. They had this opportunity to make a different choice, to do something to get them out of where they're at so that they can move into the future they now have. And many of them are also helping other people to do the same. So I am so excited because my guest today, he's amazing. You're going to love him. But his name is Jon Antonucci. With an early entrepreneurial start as a child and an amazing level of success by early adulthood, the last place that anyone expected Jon to be was in jail. Yet at 19 years old, as the handcuffs clicked onto his wrists, that is where Jon found himself being taken. His arrest forced him to face the fact that, at his core, he was not nearly as successful as it appeared outwardly. Over the course of 12 years of incarceration, Jon was able to address his his character flaws is what he's calling these things, which is something that we all have, I think. We all have something deep inside of us that we really have to address, right? But he grew in all areas of his personhood and assists other people in their own journeys of rehabilitation and recovery. His redemption story has continued in the free world as he serves in his church, volunteers in his community, adds value in his career, and shares his inspiring story of redemption with others. So, Jon, I am so excited and happy to have you here with me today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to join you today.
Thank you for saying yes, because these stories are very personal that I ask people to share.
Yeah.
And I also ask for people to be very vulnerable. And so when we first talked, we decided together that we would name the title of your episode, You're in Handcuffs. What now? So let's go back a little bit, Jon. And let's start with you sharing more about who you are as a person and what the first years of your life were like, maybe up until you turned 19 years of age.
Yeah. I was raised in a pretty strict sect of Christianity, fundamental Baptist. Maybe not. The word fundamental has kind of some connotations now that wouldn't have matched what I grew up. But we didn't go to the movies. We didn't go to the public pool. We stayed very close to ourselves. We were homeschooled all of our lives. And so what that gave me is an amazing platform for really productive life. It wasn't such that I couldn't leave the house. It was that I just couldn't go to the places where people were getting in trouble. And my parents were very intentional, even not even having a TV in the home. So they were intentional about not really uh, letting voices into our lives that were going to hopefully lead us in the wrong direction. But they never hindered our ability to go and, play with the neighbors, or in my case, go make money. And I was very entrepreneurial, as you just mentioned. At 7 years old, there was a lady down the street that her grass seemed to need attention, and so I went to my dad and I said, "Hey, can I borrow the mower? I'm gonna go see." We called her the crabapple lady because she had a big crabapple tree in her front yard.
I
Can I
love
go
it.
see if the crabapple lady wants me to mow her lawn? And he said, sure. And my dad, for things, we've worked through good and bad. But one of the things that I'm so appreciative of my dad for is he really taught us good business. He taught us the value of both a dollar as well as exchanging value for that. And so he said, sure, you can do that. You're using my mower. You pay me $1 for every yard you mow for using my mower. And then you get to keep the rest. And so that started a John's Lawn Service. And by the time I was 12, I was doing that. And I was working at the local convenience store stocking shelves. And I would sell newspapers and just basically anything that you can think of that a young individual might do to try to earn a little extra change. I was doing it. And from most outward perspective, I was very successful. And most people in the neighborhood knew everybody in relation to me. So my parents weren't Dante and Lisa, they were John's parents.
Ah, I love
And
that.
all of my siblings, it was always in relation to me because I was out meeting people and going and doing. And it was about 12 years old that I got started in martial arts, and the charm was there as well. It was I stepped in front of actually it was 11 when I started martial arts, 12 when I was first asked to teach. And the instructor got stuck on the road, and the parents of the class said, we think you should teach. And I was like, I'm not the oldest, I'm not the highest ranking, like, I shouldn't would no, I can't do that. I don't have authority to do that. And they said, "Well, we're paying for the class, so we think you should teach." And so I did. I stepped in front of that class and at 12 years old taught my very first martial arts class. By the time I was 15, I was an assistant instructor. And by the time I was 18, I was teaching over 500 students in the Phoenix metro area.
Wow, that's amazing.
And yeah, and so it just looked really good. We moved to Phoenix when I was about 16. I worked for some other jobs as well. Worked for Safeway for a while, one of the grocery stores there, and started as a we used to call them bag boys, but when I worked there, they had elevated our status. We were no longer bag boys; we were courtesy clerks.
Yes.
And and so, but quickly I was the what is I the not the stand-in, whatever they call that, the interim bakery manager, which to needing someone to step into that role, and so I did, and so just a lot of success at very young age, and everything looked really, really good on the outside, with nothing but just upward to go.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like you had a really phenomenal foundation that was laid out for you, and it just sounds like you were just a natural born leader.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Being the oldest of 5, and so, my siblings worked for me at some of those entrepreneurial pursuits, and yeah, absolutely. Natural born leader is a term that I didn't know what it meant until many years later. I got called it a lot, but it resonated because of the responsibility that comes with that I didn't understand for a long time.
Okay, so since you said responsibility and because we're talking about a lot of jobs, a lot of money here,
Yeah.
did you save your money?
I did reasonably well. I certainly spent money, but I'm trying to remember. Well, let's put it this way: by the time I was 19, I had my own truck that I'd paid for in full. I had my own place that I was paying for. So I wasn't in debt. That was another thing that my parents did really, really well. They gave us a fantastic monetary uh, understanding, and to this day, I have never paid a penny in interest.
Oh my
Which,
gosh,
yeah,
I wish I could say that. That is phenomenal. I mean, seriously, I don't know anybody personally that could also say that. So that's
wow,
kudos, man, kudos. So with such a great start to life, now we gotta get into it, right? What
yeah.
happened when you were 19 that ended you up in those handcuffs?
Well, I think what happened at 19 was less about what happened at 19 and more what happened on the way to 19.
Share that, please.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. One, when you are a pastor's kid in a very conservative environment, and you have, I'm going to call them dreams outside of what you're currently experiencing, you learn really quick, or at least I did. I learned really quick that you get further telling people what they want to hear.
Oh.
I can think of a very specific moment, and I don't think it happened then. I think that the seeds of dishonesty were already well established by this point. But I can think of like a pivotal moment in my life. There was a young lady at the church we were attending, and I wanted to go to breakfast with her. I would have had to have been 16 because I was going to drive. And my parents didn't want me to go to breakfast with her because she had a child and we weren't married. And so they were concerned that someone might see us at breakfast, see us without wedding rings, see the child, and think the worst. That was their whole kind of frame of reference. And I remember saying to them out loud, I said, if I had just told you I was going to breakfast with my friend, you never would have told me no. And it was in that moment at 16 years old that I almost made a conscious decision. Just tell people what they want to hear and they'll give you what you want. And so that kind of laid a foundation of a lack of integrity. There was some embezzlement that happened in one of the jobs that I was a part of. Um, and so there was just these foundational character flaws that you referenced earlier that led up to a point at 19 where everything just kind of got shouted from the rooftops. And so the embezzlement that happened, I was caught, I was fired from the organization, and I went to go start my own organization. My best friend who was doing the same thing, he's actually the one that kind of had exposed me to how we could take skim a little off the top if you want to try to downplay the problem. And so he was also under investigation. Now, when I went and started my own organization, the company that I had been working for had sent me a cease and desist letter via their attorneys because of a non compete that I had signed. I had decided that that really didn't hold any water. And legally, it probably wouldn't have because I had signed it when I was 17. And so, having signed it at 17, I knew that it wouldn't be legal into court. We're setting aside at this moment the fact that if you give your word, it doesn't matter how old you are. So, I'm not trying to make excuses. That was just my frame of reference. My best friend, who was about 9 years older than me, he had last signed his at like 26 or 27. And so we had this bright idea to go and basically try to get rid of the records of our employment as well as any embezzlement records that he was being investigated for. Mine were already sitting in an attorney's office across town. I was already in payback conversations and everything like that. To make a long story short, the best way that we could come up with, there was four of us involved, and we decided that we were going to light that building on fire. And it was an office building, and um, nothing nothing prepared me for this from both a perspective of I have no excuse. There's nothing that was like, oh, I'd heard from someone, no excuses, but also I had no concept of what we were really planning to do. I told people, and this always just makes people scratch their head, even to the point of the fire being lit. Going to jail was never a thought that crossed my mind. I
Wow.
was so myopic and so self-centered that the worst thing I could think of was that people wouldn't like me and people wouldn't respect me and people would find out what I had done and I would lose credibility or likability, whatever it is.
Well,
And so,
you had really had that blessed upbringing, bringing those blessed teenage years that everything that you did turned out good, and that
yeah,
everybody always praised you and just the accolades and everything. So, not having the knowledge of the other side of it, I can kind
yeah,
of see where you're coming from.
yeah,
But gosh, continue, please.
yeah. It was this very far-fetched plan and we had it all worked out and we all four of us worked at that same company, so we were mapping out the building, and I mean it was dumb on every front. And probably the only quote unquote good thing we did, and I don't want to pretend like it was actually good, but it was better than maybe the alternative, is that we were going to run around the building splashing gasoline and whatever. We were all so scared to death as the one room we got into that it just all the gas stayed in that room. And there was no, we didn't go throughout the rest of the building because we were just scared to death. And I really think I talked about natural born leader a second ago. You brought it up. I really believe that if any one of us had just said, I'm not doing this, the rest of us would have followed suit. But me being that natural born leader, it took me years to recognize that even though it wasn't my idea and even though it wasn't my plan, there was a level of culpability on me because my participation by proxy led. And that took me a long time to recognize that fire was started. I was scared to death. I had left probably 30 seconds before the match was lit. My best friend who lit that match was still standing in the room, from what I understand, that was, as I just mentioned, soaked with gasoline. And he did get out of the building, but he did not get out of the fire. And
He passed away, correct?
he passed away. He passed away. And I don't think I will ever forget the image of him on the roof awning with flames coming off of his body.
Wow.
Um, yeah,
So you said that you had left the building, so you had been inside too?
correct. Yeah, all four of us
Wow.
went inside.
Okay. And so how did you guys get inside in the first place?
There was one room in the building that we had identified that had no sensors or cameras or anything like that. It was the office of the owner on the second floor. So I mentioned that he was on the awning.
Yeah.
We had all climbed up the awning. We had broken in. There was two of us. One had one of those glass breakers that you'd have like from a car.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I had one of those multi tools that like folds into pliers.
Okay.
And so me and the other individual that had those tools hit the glass that broke it and broke the glass. And then I don't remember who, one of us, I want to say Josh, but it doesn't matter. One of us pushed in the window from there and then we climbed inside from there. And then I mentioned that I'd left 30 seconds later. So I literally like dove off the roof and rolled down kind of the embankment there. And I had gone behind the building, which is where I was when the flames literally shot into the sky. It was pretty intense. And I waited by my truck, and when he didn't show back up, I circled around the building in my truck, and so that's where I saw him on fire back on the front.
So I cannot even imagine. what that visual was like for you and what it has been for you for the rest of your life, because this has been a prison that you will probably never get out of. So before we even talk about you being arrested, I mean, there was consequences to those choices in that circumstance that will follow you forever. How
Yeah.
are you doing with that right now?
As far as I know, I'm doing okay. I mean, when I talk about it, of course, there's a great gravity of this. I hope that never goes away, actually. I don't ever want to make this to where I can just be flippant about it. I also hope that the tragedy that occurred is redeemed by the lesson learned. And I think the only way that happens is if the gravity remains. So
Yeah.
I would like to believe that I don't let it drag me down. I'm not in tears every day. I obviously, and we'll get to this later, there's other things happening and good things are proceeding. Um, but one of the reasons I'm so willing to tell my story, and I've gone out and I've got a whole presentation I share with churches and things like that. One of the reasons I'm okay with that is because I feel that the redemption can't stop with me. It has to, all other people should learn from this. And you can't learn from that the minute it just becomes a story.
Amen.
It has to maintain its gravity. So
Yeah.
yes, I think I'm doing okay with it. There's certain things that, in fact, it was weird for the literally first time in years. Last night, I had a dream that I got taken back to jail,
Mm.
and that was a very. I mean, I haven't had any dreams along that nature in a very very long time.
And
Um,
so how did that feel? How did that land on you thinking
yeah,
about that?
it was weird because in the dream, I knew that I was being pursued by the law. I had evaded capture in this dream, but there was a point where I just stopped trying to evade capture. And I was sitting with my family and I saw the lights outside the window and I said, they're getting ready to come arrest me right now. Sorry, guys. But in the dream, I still have no idea what I did wrong. There was no event that triggered it. It was just, I knew that something had gone wrong and that I was now being pursued.
Mm.
Um, and of course, dreams are very strange in the first place, right? So
They
somehow
are.
I was already wearing prison attire. And so it was like, do I need my prison sweatshirt or should I leave it here? And it was like very weird at that point. But yeah, I woke up with just this sense of like, man, first of all, where in the world did that come from? And and then like again, I hadn't dealt with that. In fact, there was some I was on a podcast probably 2 or 3 months ago, and I said the experience of getting out, which I know we're not to yet in our storyline, but it's been so surreal at the way it's all happened that if you looked at me, Marcy, and you said, John, you didn't go to prison, like that was a dream of some like I'd have a hard time arguing with you.
Right.
I really
Right.
would. And so yeah, to wake up from a dream like that, it was strange.
So I'm sitting here being moved like big time. So a few weeks ago, I had a dream and I told my husband about it, and his hand went up. Can I tell you what that means? Can I tell you what that means? And
Mm.
what he told me about my dream was so like it had to be exactly what it was. And I'm not
Wow.
claiming to be a Joseph, and I know my husband's not Joseph, that was able to interpret dreams and all that in the stories of the Bible. But what was just impressed upon me, and we're going to be sharing this here in just the next few minutes, is that initially you took no responsibility. And now I believe the way you were portraying yourself in the dream as just sitting there and waiting for them to come and take you is that you're taking full responsibility, that you've come 180
Mm.
in taking ownership and having corrected all of those character flaws.
Mm.
So
Wow, thank you.
and again, disclaimer, I am not Joseph and I am not an interpreter of dreams, but we do get inspiration and
Yeah.
the Holy Spirit can tell us things. And I just feel like you're just supposed to know that
Mhm.
you are redeemed, that you have,
Thanks.
whatever, happened back then is not
Mm.
that person that you are now. So
Thanks,
let's
Marcy.
get you're welcome. So let's get and thank God. I mean, because it's
Yeah.
he is the one that gets the praise for that. But
Yeah.
let's go back
Mhm.
and let's talk about you see him up there on fire. What happened next? Just take us through the progression of this story that is was a mess in your life that you have turned into a message of
Mm,
redemption. So
yeah.
please share with that.
Part of the planning process, including Josh, who was 9 years older than all of us, or between 8 and 10, no, between 9 and 10, whatever it was. He was older than all of us by almost a decade. He had made the statement at one point during the planning that if anything went wrong, we were supposed to get away from there as fast as we could, because we still had our whole lives ahead of us. And I saw him on fire, and it's really tough to describe, but to make a long story short, basically the building itself was shrouded by a tree. When I worked there, I cannot tell you how many people I was interviewing for jobs there that would literally drive right by the building and not see it. And so I knew where the building was. I slowed down to try to stop, but there was a vehicle directly behind me. And so if I had slammed on my brakes, I felt like I was going to cause a collision. And so I kept going, and as I passed the kind of the not true intersection, but like a crossways, I made a U-turn as soon as I could. As I was making the U-turn, the fire truck passed me. And so I made the U-turn and kind of did my little 3-point turn there in the middle of a very busy road. Not thankfully, but it was late at night, so there wasn't a lot of cars on this road. Um, and by the time I passed by, they were dragging the hoses across to stop this fire. And somehow, in between the time that I did that little loop, Josh was also now on the ground. And so I don't know if they had gotten him down or he had rolled off down. I don't know how that happened. But with the words of "Don't get anywhere near there if anything goes wrong," you got your whole life. I turned my phone off and I just drove. And the first thing I did was somewhere, I have no idea where, everything is such a blur from that moment, but somewhere I got rid of all the clothes that I had worn and dumped them in a dumpster somewhere. I got rid of the gas can I had, put it in a dumpster somewhere. I don't remember if I stopped or did anything else. I don't think I did. But just drove almost aimlessly. I have no idea what neighborhoods I drove through. This was in South Phoenix, so I very well went through some very dangerous places. Who knows? But eventually I got back to my house. And at that point, I reached out to the others who were there. They had driven off in their own vehicle. And we all rendezvoused at my house. And I remember so distinctly, I had my office set up kind of an executive style. So I had my computer against the wall, and then I could turn around, and there was a desk with chairs and stuff. Very very important feeling for a 19-year-old kid. And so I sat behind my desk, and the other two sat in the chairs across. And I remember looking at them and saying, "We were never there." And we um, agreed to that. I don't remember how much additional conversation there was. We watched a movie that night to try to get our minds off of it. And the next morning, I was trying to find Josh. Now, I did not know Josh had passed away at this point. I knew he obviously had caught fire. I knew that but the paramedics were there when I left. And so my thought was Josh was in critical condition in some hospital somewhere. And having watched way too many CSI shows and thinking that there's some magical database that just happens to know exactly where every person is in every single hospital everywhere, I made the very naive decision to call the police to file a missing persons report, because the last time I'd seen Josh was last night, and I fabricated a story that we were supposed to go to Utah. That actually was true, but then he had left, and that I didn't know where he had gone, and he hadn't come back. Well, turns out no such magical database existed. And so the police officers were kind of like, "Why are you calling us about a 28-year-old guy that was at your house last night and now you can't find?" And it was uh, just it didn't work anything like I wanted it to. I ended up actually, there was a charge at one point placed against me for filing a fictitious report, because that's not allowed. And so, to make a long story short, I did the thing that made sense to me in that moment. I obviously had my pocketed lie ready, and it was Sunday. And what do I do on Sundays? Same thing I've done my entire life. I go to church. They weren't expecting me because they knew I was supposed to be going to Utah, but I was there, and I even spoke that Sunday. I've actually for the last couple of years tried to remember why it was, because they weren't expecting me, but for whatever reason I ended up teaching there, and tried to just be normal, tried to be as normal as I could. It was Sunday afternoon that I got a call from someone saying, "Hey, they want to talk to you." Noelia, which was Josh's wife, says you were the last person with him, so they're trying to figure out what's going on. They've got a body here, and it matches Josh. And there was a lot of confusion for me. I just jumped a little bit. I apologize, but there was a lot of confusion for me because they asked, "Hey, did Josh have any tattoos?" This was not the cops. This was like a friend, a mutual friend. "Did Josh have any tattoos?" And I said, "Yeah." He had the Roman numeral 2 on his shoulder. And they said, "Okay, they think, they found Josh's body at a fire at the office." And of course, I'm playing it off like I have no idea what in the world they're talking about. But what stymied me was the fact that they said that um, the corpse had a wedding ring on. And why that stymied me was not because Josh didn't wear a wedding ring, but because I had personally witnessed him take it off prior to us leaving. And I don't know when he put it back on. I don't know what there was a lot of drama in that side of Josh's life, but that was like, okay, then it can't be Josh. I know Josh was not wearing a ring when we left. I watched him take it off. Um, and it was Josh, obviously. That afternoon, I went to the police station just as a witness. I was the last one to have seen Josh. And when I left was where you started our podcast, the cuffs clicking around my wrists, being taken to jail.
Wow. Okay. So that was a lot. And I cannot even imagine. And when we're talking about this, this happened in like less than 24 hours time,
Yeah, this was
right?
yeah, the fire was started, I want to say somewhere between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was at the police station by 4 or 5 o'clock that afternoon.
Okay. So we're looking at like 15 hours. Within 15 hours, you have handcuffs on.
Yeah.
And from that moment, what was your attitude and how did you approach your defense?
I lied. I mean, even before the handcuffs were on, I lied and I lied and I lied. That was my first, second, and third defense. That was what I had done for years, and it's what I continued to do. They ended up talking to all three of us actually, and the all three of us gave the same lie that we'd agreed to. We weren't there, etc. When they came back to me and they said, "We think you're full of it," I lied some more. When they came back to one of my other co-defendants and they said, "We think you're full of it," he lawyered up. And when they came back to the third person and said they think you're full of it, she kind of just told them what at least from her perspective, what had happened. Um, and so by the time I was handcuffs around my wrists, I was shocked. I mean, I was still I can't overstate how oblivious I was to that responsibility or even to consequences. I remember very vividly minutes before handcuffs went on my wrist saying, "I just really would like to go home. What do I got to tell you so I can go home?" Like it was just I no knowledge. So handcuffs went on my wrists, and it would just keep lying, deny, deny, deny. And that was kind of what I did at first. And I don't know exactly the timeline, but it was some weeks before I started to finally admit some things. And there were some things that I'm going to say, not to take any responsibility off of myself, because again, I was still a liar of the first degree. But there are things that don't make it easy, even if somebody wants to tell the truth. And I'll give you an example, and that is that if you've ever known somebody in jail, the first thing that the attorney and anyone else is going to tell you is do not admit to anything on the phone. It's all
So
recorded.
true.
Don't admit it, right? Just don't, you don't have to lie like I did, but don't admit it. And so I've got my family members, what is going on? What happened? Blah, blah. And even after I'm starting to sort of acknowledge, yeah, maybe I was possibly there, I'm still saying, hey, I didn't do what they accused me of, because I'm not admitting to anything. And I couldn't get past that. In my mind, what had I done? Well, I told you earlier exactly what I did. I broke a window. To me, that was where the line stopped at that
Right.
moment. And so it was at least a couple of weeks before I even admitted to my attorney that I had done something. And then even with my attorney, I mean, he had to be so frustrated with me. But even with my attorney, I tried to, I don't know if play it off is the right word, but I don't know, try to make myself look better than I actually was. And then truly, just at the core of who I was, I did not understand, or maybe I should say it didn't resonate within me, the ripple effect.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
once I finally said, yes, I was there, yes, I did it, yes, all that, I was still stuck at, but all I did was break a window.
Yeah,
That's all I did.
isn't that interesting how, like, tunnel vision you can
Yeah.
have on a circumstance, and yet in reality, and I know this to be true in the state of Arizona, having been formerly a police officer, right?
Yeah.
That the culpability is if you have knowledge of any crime that is going to be committed and you don't do something to stop it, you can be
Yeah.
charged the same as the people that do it,
And I remember
right?
my attorney telling me that when I was talking, he said, John, you don't understand. And I don't remember, you may know the term, but he basically said, if you know a crime is about to be committed and you do not take decisive preventative action to stop it, you are as culpable. And then, of
Yes.
course, you add to that the fact that, again, in the state of Arizona, as well as other places, if someone dies in the commission of a felony, it's not negligent homicide, it's not manslaughter, it's first degree murder or capital
Yes.
murder, I think is the actual term. And so I'm sitting there without cognition of the ripple effect, facing first degree murder and arson. And I think in our pre-interview, I said I'll never forget the words of my attorney the first time he sat in front of me when he said, "Hello, my name is Jeffrey Kirchler. I'm your court-appointed attorney. I will be the attorney for the duration of your pretrial proceedings unless the state chooses to seek the death penalty, at which point I will no longer be able to be your attorney and you will be appointed another." And I mean, but I'm also in denial. I'm thinking, oh, that's never going to happen. I didn't do anything. I don't even know what you're talking about. And so there was this just kind of gravity. I'm in jail. There's the door, the whole thing. But also, this isn't going to last very long. I'm sure I'll be out soon because I didn't do anything. All I did was break a window, and that's not worthy of jail. And then, well, okay, maybe it's worthy, but at most a year or two. I mean, that's and it was a long time before I got to any reasonable place of honest responsibility and genuine accountability.
Wow. Okay. So now let's talk about that accountability because you did
Yeah.
go through a full trial. And as you're sitting there at the end of the trial and you receive your sentence, what was it? And how did your time in prison, behind bars, incarcerated, how was that for you?
So the sentence, I didn't go through full trial. I did take a plea bargain, which allowed me to face between 7 and 21 years, being that we were still fairly, I say we, I was naive, others were hopeful. We were hoping, because we didn't understand the process, we were hoping that the judge would reject the plea, saying this kid is a good kid, made a bad choice, and give me less than the 7. But at most, our worst case was 7. That was what we were thinking. The prosecutor stood up at that sentencing hearing and said, "Your Honor, in all of my, I think, 20 years of being a prosecutor, I've never asked for the maximum sentence for any defendant, but this case is different." They cited a newspaper article that had decided that I was lacking remorse, again, largely because I still didn't think I'd done anything, and basically said, "I can't ask for anything less than the maximum sentence possible by law. I want 21 years for this guy." Others that were in the victim side of the room obviously asked for the same thing. My family asked for the opposite, asked for as low as the judge could give. What was interesting is there was a turning point, not necessarily during the trial, but close to it, or the sentencing, but close to it, because when the people were asking for 21 years, that didn't hurt. It was almost like they're angry. I know that's my fault. I get it.
Mm.
That wasn't a big problem for me. I don't recall any emotion other than like resignation during the pleas from the victims for maximum. What got me was the loving statements by family, friends, and former students. I was an absolute ball of tears listening to the kind things that they said about me. And so when I got to the podium to say my piece, I discarded my notes, which I had. They had actually, despite having a public defender, they had actually gone and gotten me a pretrial specialist and something else. And my attorney basically said, "John, I actually do believe you're sorry, but nobody else does because you're not communicating in a way that makes sense to anybody. And so they actually had like coached me on so that what was inside could make its way out. Now, remember, there's still a growth period that needs to take place, but I at this point I at least did understand that I put myself there. Um, and so I took my notes, I slid them over, and I said, I'm just gonna speak from the heart. And I basically just said, I I'm an idiot. I know I hurt these people. I wish I could take it back. I wish I could bring my friend back. I know I don't deserve your mercy, but I'm going to ask for it anyways. And that's not verbatim, but that was the heart of it. And the judge basically split down the middle. Everybody on my side wanted 7. Everybody on their side wanted 21. He gave me 14. And so that was definitely a punch to the gut, because even though I was in a place of recognition ish at that point, we still never thought I would get that much. And to the point of maybe even some sense of reality, the other two, one of them got 4 and one of them got 7. So from the reason I got so much is because of the lies, and more lies that really poorly positioned me in front of the bench there. But when you see others got so much less, that makes it easier to say, okay, maybe it wasn't completely unreasonable to hope for 7, because someone that did the exact same thing also did get 7. They just were smart enough to lawyer up and not lie. So
Right, right. Yeah, they didn't have maybe as much of the inside junk that they needed to work on, right?
absolutely,
So let's
absolutely,
talk about prison, how you
yeah,
dealt with that inside junk, and then how
yeah.
you helped other people to get started doing the same. Share with that, please.
Absolutely. So this is about halfway through my jail time. I was in jail for 10 months before I went to prison. And about halfway through the jail time, that was where there was some growth that started to take place. And in that place, I started to take classes. I started to go back and kind of look. From the faith side of things, I recognized that I had been raised in faith, but didn't really know what that meant to me as an individual. And so I kind of just discarded everything I'd been taught and said, okay, what does the Bible actually say? What 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 does this really mean? And so that was the beginning of an actual relationship with God, I believe. It was the beginning of actual growth. I took classes and went to Bible studies and started to sign up for some correspondence stuff. And when I got to prison, I had already kind of hit the ground running in that regard. And so did the same thing kind of when I got there. It was very new, obviously. It was a very scary experience. I had been told, for example, that I would get to prison and that people would kind of watch me for a couple of weeks. And then the groups that felt that I might be a fit for them would come and maybe approach me. That is not what happened. I'd been there less than 15 minutes when I got attacked by 3 guys from behind. And I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I wasn't getting raped today. And so that martial arts came in real handy.
Thank goodness,
Um,
right? Oh my
yeah, no
gosh.
kidding. But it set a precedent, and it was actually really interesting because the Lord did some interesting things in that. Number one, I was safe. I was not harmed in that altercation at all. Turns out they weren't actually trying to harm me per se. It's what they call in prison a heart check, which basically is designed to see if you're tough enough to fight for yourself. Because if you're not, then it's gonna be a problem for you. And so I had fought back. That worked out well. It kind of created a baseline of, okay, he's just here to do his time and whatever. 2 weeks after I got there, another 19-year-old kid showed up who didn't fight back, literally curled up in a ball on the floor and started crying. And I've been in prison 2 weeks more than this kid. And I remember sitting down with him maybe a month or two later going, dude, you've got to learn to tell these people no. They're making a clown out of you, and you think you're part of the group, and I'm just telling you, you're not. They don't care about you. They don't like you. You're being treated very poorly, because you don't know how to say no. So that is scary. That's tough, right? You don't tell your mom that story right away. That's one of those ones that you just kind of hold in, and you just keep moving forward and trying to grow and proceed. And I think I was only at that first unit for like 3 months because they were switching it over to a different form of population. There's kind of populations are separated. So you have different classifications of custody, and then you also have different groupings of sometimes certain crimes are kept separate from other crimes and things. So my general population unit was being moved. And so on the way to the new unit, I met a guy who had already been in prison 11 years and had done a lot of the things that I kind of felt like I wanted to do. He was programming and he'd gotten some college stuff done. He'd even written a couple of books. And so I was only with him about 6 months, but I learned a lot of things to do and a lot of things not to do from him. And that kind of set me on a good path. I started teaching classes there. I started working with some of the counselors, and I spent 12 years behind bars. During that time, it was my favorite saying has become, God knows how to take our stupidity and turn it into something great.
Yes, he does. Amen.
And that's really, I mean, that's just the way it can be best described. I was able to gain several collegiate degrees. I took all kinds of classes, and then I started creating classes, and I was instrumental. My legacy in the Department of Corrections in Arizona was that I helped build what's known as inmate peer programming. And it was a collection of classes, events, and opportunities that were designed to give people the tools they need to stay out of prison. And I don't know if I shared this with you. I don't remember exactly how long ago it was, but it was just recently. I started working with a group with the Arizona Small Business Association that helps people that are getting out of prison be successful at starting their own business.
Oh, that's so awesome. I love that.
Yeah. And so one of the guys, he got out just maybe a month or two ago, and he's starting his own business, and I got assigned to him as his mentor in this process. So we're on the phone and we're talking, and I'm giving him just a little bit of my story to kind of provide some encouragement for him. And we're halfway through this call, and he goes, "Wait, you're Jon?" And I go, "Yeah, Jon Antonucci. I've been hearing about you for years." And I'd never met the guy, but apparently he also had a legacy similar to mine. And because I had gotten out several years before him, he had been, in a sense, following in my footsteps. And other people apparently had compared us quite often on some of the units that he had been on. But by the time I left, that was the reputation I have. It wasn't the reputation of a liar because I hadn't lied in 12 years. You know, you can't lie in prison. Everybody can see everything you do. It'd just be a dumb choice. But there was learning, there was growth, and a couple of pivotal moments for me was some internal, or maybe I should say introspective moments that I think created some pivot points. So one of them was the second time I applied for clemency. Clemency is basically a way to try to get your sentence reduced, basically just saying, look, I've learned my lesson. Can you help me out? The first time I had asked for 7 years, I felt like I had agreed to 7 to 21, which was a growth moment. Remember, I wanted 1 or 2. So the first time I had grown and I had said, okay, I agreed to 7. That's true. Can I just get the lower end of what I agreed to? And they were not having it. We were able to apply every couple of years. 2 years later, I applied again. And that was when I started to finally understand the responsibility of inherent leadership. And I mentioned this earlier in our time together. It was during my preparation that it occurred to me, okay, one person got 4 years, one person got 7, but they weren't the natural leaders. And even though we might have physically done the same or essentially similar things, there is more responsibility on me as a natural born leader. And even though I still was not granted clemency, I think there was a huge growth moment when I didn't ask for 7 and I asked for 10. And I said, hey, I get it. There's a responsibility here that doesn't matter what I did or didn't do. My participation by proxy holds a level of responsibility that others may or may not ever own or understand. And so that was a moment of great growth in my life. Another one pertained to how personal growth has to be done at the benefit or for the benefit of those that we're called to serve. I mentioned a second ago that I was getting a bunch of degrees and things. And I remember I was sitting on my bunk and I was reading my book, and somebody tapped the end of the bunk because that's how you get people's attention in prison. And I didn't look up with disgust, but inside I was kind of like, can't they see I'm busy? And in that moment, it was like the spirit just spoke to me and basically said, all of this studying, all of this improvement, all of this learning doesn't do you any good if you're not using it to invest in others. And then through, I don't know, it's probably within the next couple of weeks, I came to the recognition that what I call the souls in front of me are not as any less important than the souls outside. I had so many people tell me, "Oh, God's preparing you for something in there, and this is like a training ground, and this is like a boot camp, and all those things." To an extent, there's some truth to that. You do have some opportunities to study and grow and things in prison that just life doesn't permit in the free world. There's too many other things like jobs and bills to pay that take up your time. But it's not just a training ground. Those aren't dummies that we're just trying to get through so we get to the real work. Those individuals have the same hearts, the same needs, the same value as human beings. And those kind of epiphanies really helped me in my growth journey and allowed me to have a passion for empowering others that has carried through even to today.
Yeah, God actually calls us to be the church. It's not a building, right? So it's
Right.
wherever we are, we need to be the church. And so I love that you had that epiphany that it's like you may be doing all this personal growth, which that's such a big buzzword. And I think it's really, really important. We all need to be working on ourselves. Yet, if we aren't focused on growing ourselves so that we can help others, it's really empty growth.
It's still myopic. It's still selfish. It's still ego-centered. It's still all about me, and that's not the call.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you ended up getting how much time?
14-year sentence, 12 of which was in behind bars and 2 of which was spent under community supervision.
Okay. Okay. And you're completely clear now, right?
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yay. And yet, you are a felon.
Yeah.
You have been labeled that and will be labeled that for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, even if I get it expunged, it's still there. Google will find it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that there's a lot of people out there that have labels on them that are negative or are felons themselves that they've really taken on that and taken ownership of that label. And so they've been stuck in a space. What are your thoughts on letting those labels, really, I mean, because it's a label from the past,
Yeah.
continue into your future? I mean, it's totally taking ownership of your whole life. What would you say to someone that is letting that label or having someone else have control over what your future is? What are your thoughts on that? Because I know you've got a lot of them.
Yeah, there's a dichotomy of thought really because on the one hand, if you ignore the label altogether, it becomes a gotcha. Right? If I pretend like this isn't a part of my story and Marcy Nettles decides to do a podcast on me and I'm planning on talking all about my business and all the stuff I'm doing with leadership and blah, 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 what ends up happening? Well, now, if Marcy is even half a journalist, she's going to say, by the way, I did a little research. Can you tell me about the time you were in prison? And so now it becomes a got you. It becomes this paralytic. It becomes this thing you're running from. It becomes this thing and I know people that have tried to change their names and everything else to try to avoid this title. So I don't think it's a good idea to pretend like it doesn't exist and not potentially learn the lessons, but also give it power because it's a gotcha. On the other hand, too much acknowledgement of it, again, like you just said, keeps you in that space. So what I don't go around doing is I don't go around saying, "Hey, I'm a felon. Hey, Marcy, I'm a felon. Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm Felon John." Right? Like I'm not going to take on the label. So I think there has to be a balance of ownership. Sorry about that. Ownership of the situation without ownership of the label. This is an experience that I had. These are the lessons that I learned. These are the things that have happened. And I used to teach guys, I would, as far as for job interviews, I would say there's a 4-step strategy when dealing with the resume gap question, because that's going to be an issue for many people. Own what you did. Don't make excuses. Don't blame the cops. Don't talk about a crooked judge. I made a bad choice. Then talk about what you've learned. But because of that, I have learned this and this and that. Then talk about how you plan to move forward. I plan to do these things, and here's how I'm going to add value in your organization. And it's the whole picture of it. And so for me, I'm telling my story. I'm explaining what's going on. Nobody can come and be like, Jon's not who he says he is. He thinks he's this leadership hotshot, but really he just spent 12 years in prison. No. I got you. You're absolutely right. And let me tell you why that's actually beneficial for your organization. I did a podcast earlier this week or last week, and I said that. I said, I don't have a client that I don't make sure they're aware of my past because I don't want to put them in that situation either. I don't want them to they bring me in, I do a seminar, and then someone goes, hey, man, why am I going to listen to that dude? You just spent a bunch. But at the same time, I'm not going to, well, I'm just a felon. Marcy, I can't talk to you. I'm no good. No, of course not. And so I think
No.
it really, there's this balance that has to be achieved where I have to say, all right, I went through this. I made bad decisions. I put myself in a bad situation, but the intrinsic value that I possess did not get diminished. There were choices, there were consequences. And now I have this beautiful opportunity to make different choices that will have different consequences.
Yes. So anybody that is listening to this, whether you are a felon or have another label that has been tried to be put on you by someone else, um, maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody you love and care about. You need to share this episode because you need to hear John's story because you do have the power to change the narrative around your own life, right?
Yeah.
So, what would be the first things that someone should do to be able to start changing that narrative and taking ownership and control over their own lives again?
Make different choices. It's got to start by making different choices. I can tell you all day long, hey, Marcy, I'm a different person. Hey, Marcy, I've learned my lesson. I used to tell people often, I would say, listen, I get it. You've changed, but your family has spent the last 20 years knowing the old version of you. They're going to need to see a few years of this new version before they're going to care what you have to say about it. So it starts by making different choices, and then you have the opportunity to talk about the past choices versus the present choices.
Oh, that's so good. And you have to have that right expectation that just because you made a decision that you're going to change and you're going to be different, that other people are just going to jump on board and believe you, especially if you've been a complete liar for a long time,
Yeah.
right? Right?
I remember vividly asking my mom, hey, are there any struggles that you're still dealing with? Anything I can do to help demonstrate there's a change? Because for years, I told you what you wanted to hear, you believed me, and then you found out that it was all a house of cards. So
Mm,
now I'm in prison. You really can't see what I'm doing. All you can do is hear. It did help that almost every time they came to visit, the guards had nothing but good things to say about me. That helped a little bit. But seriously, right? You find out that your son for the last dozen years has been nothing but a liar. What do you start to think about? All right, well, is he actually doing these good things? Has he actually changed? And just recognize nobody owes me the opportunity. And the same thing for anybody else. That label is there, and that label, you can choose what you're going to do. You can make better choices, but you can't choose what they're going to do. And there's going to be some of us that are going to never hear from someone again. I'll give you a real story real quick. There's a former student of mine. His mother believes that I've changed. We've had good conversations. We went out to lunch together. It's great. He does not believe the same. He has asked that my name not be mentioned in his presence. And that's his journey. That doesn't, I can't change that. I can be who Jon is supposed to be. I can't change how anybody thinks about Jon. But what I can do is know that when my head hits the pillow tonight, I am not the Jon that I was 15 years ago.
mm. Yeah, that's so good because everybody does have their own journey, their own decisions, and their own ownership in their own lives as well.
Yeah.
And they have the right to make those decisions. So, you just allowing other people to do that is also growth in your
Yeah.
life. Okay, so let's talk really fast about the tools that you learned that helped you facilitate your own success on, and now this excellence that you have in your life. Can you
Yeah.
briefly share with us those tools so that someone else could potentially grab hold of those and let them become their tools too?
There's a saying that says you're going to be the same person you are today in 5 years. I'm sorry, in 5 years, you're going to be the same person you are today, plus the books you read and the people you meet. Um, Feed your mind the content that is going to get you in the direction you want to go, and spend time with the people who are either on that same journey or are already there. There's so many books that I thousands of books, or I'm sorry, no, probably not thousands, probably about 1,000, hundreds of books that I read during my incarceration, and then degrees and different things. But a lot of it was absorbing things that were good. The Bible says renewing the mind, just getting us into a different way of thinking, forging new synaptic connections, so that when someone asks us a question, the first thought is not, how do I lie and make myself look good? The first thought is, how do I serve the individual standing in front of me? And there, I mean, as far as tools, introspection is a big one. Be taking an honest look. Every year, I used to have people close to me, the 5 closest people to me. So usually, like a person that I worked with, a person that I served in the church with, a family member, and then 2 people that maybe lived near me. I would ask them to take it was a personality profile on my behalf, so that I would understand more of how I was being perceived, and what other people saw when they looked at me. So gaining introspection, taking feedback, reading good books, spending time with good people. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, but it just really starts by saying, am I satisfied with who I am? And if not, what am I going to do about it? And the way it worked for me, maybe you're not a book person. Maybe that's just tough. Maybe it's a podcast for you. Maybe it's a you're blank, now what? And just spend the next several weeks getting caught up on all Marcy's podcasts, just so you can recognize that what has happened doesn't have to continue to happen, but take decisive action. And if you want a change, there's another saying that's actually from AA, I think. Nothing changes if nothing changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And and one of the things is that you said there is that you don't have to do it by yourself. You have to be the one
Yeah.
that makes the decision, but then you can ask other people for help.
Yes.
There's strength
Make
in
sure it's the right
numbers.
people. Make
Yes,
sure it's the
yes.
right people.
Yeah. Yeah, because you don't want to be influenced by your environment if it's a negative environment. You want to
Yes.
become somebody that's so powerful and so strong in what you believe and who you are and what you do that you can influence the environment. Right? You wanna
Exactly.
become that person. Okay, so I could talk and talk and talk, but I want you to be able to get to your date night with your wife. So just share with me more of what you're doing now, because I want people to hear the facts of what you're doing,
Yeah.
coming from the story you just told us. I want them to know what you're doing, how you're helping other people, and just what your final words would be for the What Now tribe.
Awesome. Yeah. So since I got out, it's been just an incredibly blessed experience. So much gratitude is in my heart every day. Met and married a wonderful woman, and started working well, let me do this in the right order. Started working as a training manager for an international specialty logistics company, putting all that work that I had done into developing curricula into the corporate world, and was able to move up in that organization. But while I was a training manager, I recognized a fault that we had in our organization, and basically it was the same fault that now I realize is in almost all organizations, and that is that we were not empowering our frontline leaders. We were promoting people to team leads, supervisor, etc., and then just hoping they would figure out how to do well because they did well in their job. So now they should be able to do well leading other people doing that job. And that's just not how it works. And I could talk for the next 3 hours about why that's not true. But we want to take action and fix that problem within our own organization. And through a series of steps, I just realized this is a problem all over the place. Almost nobody is trying to actually deal with this problem, and I want to meet that need. So early last year, we officially incorporated as SML Consultative. SML stands for Servant Minded Leadership, where we empower what we call the forgotten leaders, those middle management and frontline leaders that almost never get any training. And we provide just what we hope are dynamic, real world solutions that will actually give them the tools they need to effectively engage with their team, which we believe is going to help decrease employees leaving or increase retention of employees, and then increase customer satisfaction. Because if your leaders are treating your staff right, your staff will treat your clients right. And it's a very nice circle that happens there. So that's what a lot of work is going into right now, putting a ton of time and energy into getting that started. We got it started in Phoenix. Recently, I moved to Greenville, South Carolina. And so now we're opening this market and trying to serve organizations here as well. And it's very exciting getting involved with a new church now and working to be a blessing in that capacity. So many amazing, wonderful things have happened, and I mean, we could probably do a whole other podcast just on the after story on working through some things and working through getting an apartment with that felon label
Yes,
and
that's a
things like that.
thing. Yeah.
It is, yeah, it is. So
And getting a
I've
job
had it
that's not at a fast food restaurant or a serving
construction,
job, right? Or
yeah,
construction, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Oh my gosh, we could. We
exactly.
totally could.
So, but yeah, it's been so blessed, and I think the difference now is that instead of it was like before, where it was like, look at all the stuff I'm doing. Now I just recognize that there's another saying I really like. I have a lot of sayings. We're all turtles on fence posts. Have you ever seen a turtle on a fence post?
No,
If you did, I guarantee you he didn't get there by himself.
no. Somebody helped him. Yeah, somebody put him
Someone
there.
helped. We're
That's
all turtles on
funny.
fence posts. So that's what I really believe. As far as last words for the tribe, man, don't give up and just be the person that you want people to respect, right? Like if you feel like you can't get past, you're whatever your blank is. You're a felon, or I don't know exactly what you might be experiencing in your life, but whatever it is, that title does not need to define your destiny. Doesn't matter how long someone wants to put it on you. You'll define that by the choices that you make and the way that you conduct yourself.
Amen. Thank you. That was absolutely perfect. All right. So, tribe, Jon wants to give you an extra special free gift today. So if you go to marcynettles.com/freebies, we're going to be able to get you the link to Jon's leadership channel, where you're going to be able to hear so much more of his amazing wisdom and guidance. So make sure you go to marcynettles.com/freebies and claim the freebie for this episode so we can get that shot right over to you. So Jon, where can people connect with and follow you?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. If you look me up on LinkedIn, Jon Antonucci, or Servant Mind or SML Consultative, Servant Minded Leadership. You look up any of that on LinkedIn, very active. Servantmindedleadership.com is the business website, or jonantonucci.com if you're looking for a speaker or something like that. On my personal side, that's jonantonucci.com. You'll find more of the faith and speaking side. If you're looking on the business side, servantmindedleadership.com. You can get a hold of me in any of those places.
Fantastic. It has been such an honor, Jon. Thank you so much for saying yes to this interview. I mean,
My pleasure.
your episode is going to bless so many people. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy. It's been an absolute honor.
Thank you.